So good afternoon again, everybody. And this is the fourth of our videos about Inquirers courses. And I'm really happy to be having a chat now with my friend, Jordan Ware. Hello, Jordan. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
And could you just maybe say a bit about yourself so that people have some sense of who they're listening to?
Sure. So I'm Jordan. I am the priest at Good Shepherd Anglican Church in the North End and the Archdeacon for Social Justice and Community Connection. I am a Texan and a half marathoner and a Greyhound lover. So happy to be here with y'all.
Lovely. The dogs, not the buses, right?
The dogs, not the buses. Yes, the buses, sadly, not up to snuff.
So I'm talking to you because you have some experience with a course produced by the Forward Movement people called Transforming Questions, which I doubt if anybody here has actually heard of it in our group, in our lay evangelist group. So with that in mind, could you just describe it to them?
Sure. So Transforming Questions is a 10-session series put together by Forward Movement, which is an Episcopal publishing house. So it is specifically reflecting an Anglican perspective in the way that they've designed the course. A thing I love about it is that it is free and just absolutely free to download and to use. Another thing that I love about it is that it's really thorough. There is not a ton of extra work needed by the facilitator. They really do lay it out for you. So it offers, it's called Transforming Questions because they orient each of the sessions around a question, which are questions that they believe that new Christians are perhaps asking, or people who find some kind of barrier to Christianity that they're asking. So, you know, one of the questions is, why do bad things happen to good people? Or where do we go when we die? Or how should I read the Bible? So because it's based on these different questions, that invites deeper engagement from the folks who participate.
One of the things I loved about it I haven't really looked at it very closely, but I have taken a look at it. And one of the things I loved about it was that the introductory session is really about validating the whole idea of asking questions.
Yes. Which
apparently some people think they're not allowed to do.
Yeah, I mean, listen, so Forward Movement is coming from an American perspective, but there are definitely a lot of Christians around the world who are raised to believe that they can't ask questions and they can't disagree with their pastor or disagree with the Bible. I mean, I'm from Texas, I said before, right? I'm very familiar with folks who have the attitude, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. And so the whole course is oriented around the idea that you can ask these questions and you can wrestle with these questions the same way that Jacob wrestled with God. And the important thing is to not let go of God in the questioning and in the wrestling. And even if you feel that you haven't come to an answer, certainly in the group that I led, the Why Do Bad Things Happen session, I don't know that we came to really an answer. I don't know that any Christian has ever come to an answer.
Is there an answer to that question?
Exactly. But that's the point of the course, not that we're like answering all of the questions for people, but rather that we are a community of people that are faithfully engaging in those questions.
So what would a session of this course look like? Like what kind of structure would it have?
So I led this course, co-led it with Steve London and Stephanie London last fall, which was very much during the pandemic. And so we did it over Zoom. Though that's not how it was designed. It really is designed much more in that alpha vein where there's a meal and a social element to it. So you absolutely can do it that way once it's safe to do so. But the way that we did it was over Zoom. We had almost a lecture, about a 20 to 25 minute presentation from one of the three of us. And we added a bunch of pictures and we jazzed up some of the quotes that are in the facilitator's guide to put them on the screen in front of people. And then we divided into breakout rooms where there were discussion questions prepared by the course, and we were able to connect with people and really listen to what they had to say and what they had heard in the initial presentation. And then we came back together, we prayed together. It depended on the leader. Sometimes we listened to a song on YouTube as part of our prayer or something like that. Other times we just had, they have collects to open and close every single session in there. And so you can just pray a collect if that's what you want to do.
And I think there's a book, isn't there, with sort of some a more expanded version of the talks that are you aware
I
of
think
that?
so.
Yeah.
By the same authors.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah.
So the other thing I noticed was that there are references in terms with page numbers of things with the Episcopal Church Book of Common Prayer. So how did you handle that in terms of like the Canadian context? Were you able to sort of find equivalent material in our liturgical texts, or?
Sometimes we did that. Absolutely. Sometimes the same collect is in our BAS, and we were able to just, change the page numbers as far as that goes. But sometimes we use the Episcopal one. There are Anglican Communion partners, and so no reason not to connect with their collect.
Yeah. One of the things that we're looking at with a lot of these kinds of courses is the fact that, some are produced in Britain, some are produced in the United States. Very few are actually produced in Canada. And very few kind of grow out of it. And there's always a bit of a translation thing sort of going on with some of those things. I always used to joke about how I had to explain all of Nicky Gumbel's jokes when we were using the Alpha course, because they fit very well in his cultural setting, but maybe a little more foreign for us. So were you aware of any of that sort of stuff when you were using the material?
I would say in general, it mostly works. There is a little bit more of that helping people understand that questioning is okay, that speaks to maybe more of a close relationship with more fundamentalism,
right?
Shall we say?
Yeah.
Now, in Alberta, we certainly have some fundamentalist churches here, so maybe it fits more closely with Alberta than with other places in Canada. But definitely, it maybe speaks to some of the cultural resonances of the fundamentalist churches in the US that may or may not be as present here, or maybe some of the political pieces, right? The marriage between the religious right and the Republican Party is not exactly matched with the Conservative Party of Canada.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So how did people respond to the course? What kind of response did you get?
So it was a good response. I will say we didn't have any genuine non-Christians, completely new, fresh-faced off the street that came in. And I don't know if that's because it was over Zoom, or if it was a marketing thing, or if it just is not as attractive as I want it to be to some genuinely non-Christian folks. But we did have some people who had been to church sometimes but weren't really fully committed and had lots and lots of questions that came along. And we also had, some teens. We had parents join, hoping that this would engage some of their teens' questions that they had. In general, I would say the response was quite good, because it was really, everybody has these questions, right? Not just new Christians. Everybody wants to know, why do bad things happen? How should I read the Bible? Why did Jesus have to die? And we need to be reminded of that, even if we've been Christians for years. There may be something that is just on our heart and it hits us in a completely different way. How should we pray? Does God answer prayer? I think all of us are maybe wondering that a little bit during this pandemic. And so to re-engage those questions faithfully, I think was a really good experience for the folks. I certainly had a lovely time co-teaching with the Londons. If they ever have availability in their new role, I highly recommend co-teaching with them. But so it was a good course and we had good response. But as I say, it was predominantly folks who are already familiar with Christian basics, and they needed that reminder that they could ask questions and, oh yeah, I never really did understand that. Or I learned that in Sunday school when I was 12 before I got confirmed, and I have forgotten about it in the 40 years since I was 12. So, it was good.
So do you think that it would work in a setting where there were some people in the group that weren't Christian at all?
I think that it would depend on the group, as with a lot of these courses, right? I have never led an Alpha course, but I've been a participant in an Alpha course. And so a lot of these inquirers, newcomers courses, it's less about the material itself and much more about the group. And is the group really willing to engage with the questions and to buy in this course, particularly to the idea that we can question it, and to say to the non-Christians who are present in the room, it's okay for you to say no, like all of that the leader talked about in the presentation. Once you're in the breakout rooms, right? Everything the leader presented, that sounds bonkers. I'm not interested in a faith that believes that. Or that's really nice, the presentation, but my experience of church has been this other negative experience of church, for example. And so I don't know that I really buy that churches will really welcome people like me, etc. So I think that you have to have the whole group buying into the fact that really, genuinely, as long as it's not something that's harmful to people, anything is okay. And that's much more important than the material itself.
So perhaps it would be a good thing if a church was thinking of adopting this course as an inquirer's course, to gather potential leaders together first and go through the material with them. But when you're done, just to have some time with them talking about like the philosophy of inquirers courses and how it will be different, and how we need to kind of be careful about our conversation when we are intentionally reaching out to people who are outside faith, who have not found their way into faith yet. Perhaps that conversation would need to take place with the leaders.
Yes, I would absolutely say so, that if you've got groups of folks who really have quite a lot of shoulds for Christians, they may not be the best fit for leading this kind of course.
So people have to be really on board with the philosophy of the whole sort of questioning ethos of the course in order to be able to lead it with integrity. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, good. So if you were giving advice to anybody who wanted to lead this course, what would you say?
I would say that you absolutely should do it, that all of the equipment you need is available in the free download. And as you and I just said, Tim, go through it with some folks who you think will be open to it. And over the course of that experience, you should be able to determine who's a good fit to really engage with non-Christians. And you can go forth from that place and really advertise it to people who are curious about Christianity, but who really feel hesitant to identify as part of the church.
And perhaps it's important at that point in time to give some thought about your church's magnetic field as well, right? I mean, like, how are you actually going to make contact with people who don't identify as Christians? And are people in the congregation willing to invite people to be part of that, right? Or how are you going to actually make that contact? Because I think a lot of people still have a "if you build it, they will come" kind of approach to these kinds
of. I mean, I think in order for this course to work, you do have to find people who are curious
Mhm.
And you could run it multiple ways, right? Like you could run it with a really intellectual group of people,
Yeah.
university professors and staff, for
Yeah.
example, who are curious in understanding Christian beliefs, not from a devotional point of view, but just
Mm.
I'm in a post-Christian world. I don't know anything about this church, and I would
Yeah.
be curious the same way that we might be interested in learning about Islam,
Yeah.
not to convert, but just to know what our neighbors believe.
Yeah.
So you could find some success with that,
Mm.
if that was something that you wanted to do, or you would need to have people who are at least not put off by the idea of Jesus and by the idea of church.
Mm. Yeah. And I think there's actually more of those people out there than we sometimes think, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of Christians have this idea that the whole world is against them, and
Mm.
they don't realize that there's actually a lot of spiritual curiosity out there, you know, and a lot of people are basically friendly, I think. So,
Absolutely. And I think if you find the right leaders who will be genuinely welcoming and not judgy,
hmm.
then I think that will enable you to be able to have conversations with folks who have a deep spiritual need
Hmm. Hmm.
to encounter God,
Hmm.
but they don't quite know how, or they have these questions that are a barrier to them.
It's just occurred to me that I need to ask you: did you have any problem with the length of the course? Like, were there some people who might have been put off by a course that was 10 weeks long?
Not to my knowledge. I would have to ask the Londons if any of the folks that they invited chose not to come because
Yeah.
of that length of time. You know, this was at a stage in the pandemic when I think a lot of people were really bored
Yeah.
in their houses. And so we had a lot of people who were like, okay, I'll spend my Wednesday evening with y'all on Zoom.
Hmm.
Just so you're the first people I've talked to today.
Yeah.
And so I do think there's a little bit of a difference in people's regular busy lives, right?
Yeah, I have an agenda for that question, which is the sort of, I mean, I've got a course called Starting at the Beginning that I created years ago. And it was a sort of a 4-week and 6-week sort of, it's 10 weeks altogether, but it's split nicely into 4 and 6. But over the years, I found that it was more and more difficult to get people to commit to that. But like you, during the pandemic, I moved the thing onto Zoom. And, you know, we had lots of people sort of, and actually what I did with it was that I pre-recorded the talks and loaded them up a few days ahead of time so that people could watch them ahead of time. And then we only had to spend we just basically spent an hour together in discussion sort of based around the talks that people had already watched. So there's all kinds of creative ways of making it work, right? Even in the sort of a strange time that we were in with the pandemic. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to tell us about this before we bring this to a close?
I don't think so. Just that a thing I love about it is that it's really open-minded. It really genuinely doesn't engage from any sort of political perspective or any part of the spectrum. It really invites people to question. And it also raises new questions that people may not have realized they had, but are in the back of their mind. And it invites people to go deeper in a way that I think is really helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you. This has been really helpful. And I know that our trainee evangelists are going to find it helpful as well. So thanks for spending the time with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.